Close your eyes for a second. It's 1975. You're on a cross-country flight. The man next to you leans back, pulls out a Marlboro Red, and lights up right there in seat 14B. The attendant walks by, smiles, and keeps moving. Nobody bats an eye. Down on the ground, your neighbor's kid, maybe 8 years old, walks into the corner drugstore, slides a crumpled dollar across the counter, and asks for a pack of Winstons for his dad. The cashier doesn't ask for ID. Nobody does. Meanwhile, somewhere in a suburban backyard, 4 children are hurling heavy, sharp-tipped metal darts at each other's feet. Their parents are inside, making cocktails with Cyclamate Sweeteners. The walls are painted with lead paint. The car in the driveway runs on leaded gasoline. And nobody, not one single person, thinks anything is wrong. Because it wasn't. Not then. Welcome back. Today we're going on a trip to 1975, the year America was free, loose, and in hindsight, spectacularly unregulated. We're counting down 20 things that were completely, perfectly, 100% normal in 1975 that would earn you a fine, a lawsuit, or a pair of handcuffs today. Stay with me all the way to the end because number 1 will genuinely surprise you. And drop a comment if you remember any of these. We read every single one. If you ever flew before 1988, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The moment you stepped onto that plane, you entered a cloud. Not the clouds outside, a cloud of cigarette smoke that hung in the cabin like a permanent fog. Airlines had smoking sections and non-smoking sections, but here's the thing about smoke. It doesn't read the seating chart. Look at the seat in front of you on any 1975 airplane, built right into the armrest, an ashtray, recessed, chrome-edged, perfectly sized for a Camel Light. It was standard equipment, like the tray table, like the oxygen mask above your head. In 1975, approximately 75% of American adults had either smoked at some point or lived with a smoker. Lighting up on a plane wasn't rude, it was routine. The flight attendants offered you a light if you needed one. The change came slowly. In 1988, smoking was banned on domestic flights under 2 hours. By 1990, it was banned on all domestic flights. By 2000, it was gone from international flights entirely. Today, smoking on a commercial aircraft can earn you a federal fine of up to $25,000 and possible criminal charges. Picture this. Your mom is cooking dinner. She realizes she's out of cigarettes. She calls over her 9-year-old, "Honey, run down to the corner store. Get me a pack of Newports. Tell Mr. Patterson they're for me." And the kid goes, and Mr. Patterson sells them. And nobody, not the child, not the mother, not Mr. Patterson, not the health department, not the police, nobody thinks this is strange. Because it wasn't. Not in 1975. There were no federal age restrictions on tobacco purchases until the 1990s. And even where states had laws on the books, enforcement was essentially non-existent. Cigarette vending machines sat in restaurant lobbies, bowling alleys, and hotel corridors, and anyone with a few quarters could walk up and get a pack, no questions asked. Some children carried a handwritten note from a parent. Some didn't even need that. The transaction was perfectly ordinary. Today, federal law prohibits the sale of tobacco to anyone under 21. Retailers who sell to minors face fines of up to $10,000 per violation. And those cigarette vending machines? Gone. Regulated out of existence. Turn on the TV in 1970. It's prime time. Your family is watching Ed Sullivan or Gunsmoke or The Brady Bunch. And between segments, a rugged cowboy appears on screen, square jaw, flannel shirt, riding across Monument Valley on horseback. He reaches into his breast pocket, pulls out a cigarette, lights it, takes a long, satisfied drag. "Come to where the flavor is," the voiceover says. "Come to Marlboro Country." This wasn't controversial. This was just television. Cigarette companies were among the biggest advertisers in America. They sponsored game shows, news programs, soap operas. The Flintstones, a cartoon, once featured Fred and Barney smoking Winston cigarettes in a TV spot. The ban came on January 2, 1971, the day after the Public Health Cigarette Smoking Act went into effect. The tobacco industry actually lobbied for the ban, partly because it also eliminated anti-smoking public service announcements that were required under the Fairness Doctrine. They calculated they'd come out ahead. Today, cigarette advertising on American television is completely prohibited. Any brand that attempted to run a cigarette commercial on network TV would face immediate FCC action. Here's one that genuinely stops people cold when they hear it. In the mid-1970s, hundreds of American high schools had officially designated smoking areas. Not hidden spots behind the bleachers, not the parking lot where the rebels snuck away. Official, school-sanctioned, administration-approved smoking zones where students could light up between classes. Some schools even had smoking lounges, indoor rooms with ashtrays and benches. You showed up to school, went to first period, and then at the bell walked to the smoking lounge to have a cigarette before second period. Teachers smoked in their classrooms. Coaches smoked on the sidelines. The principal might have a cigarette at his desk. The smell of tobacco was simply part of the atmosphere of American education in 1975. As awareness of secondhand smoke grew, the tide shifted. By the late 1980s, most schools had eliminated smoking areas. By 1994, the Pro-Children Act prohibited smoking in facilities that received federal funding for children's services. Today, smoking within 25 feet of a school building is banned in most states. A teacher who smoked in a classroom today would likely lose their license. In 1975, getting into a car was a very different experience. You slid across the bench seat, because bench seats. No center console, no cup holders, just one long upholstered bench from window to window. The seatbelt was there, coiled against the door frame usually, but you weren't wearing it. Nobody was. Studies from the era found that less than 10% of Americans regularly wore seatbelts in the mid-1970s. The belts felt uncomfortable. They wrinkled your clothes. Some people genuinely believed, and this was a common argument at the time, that in a crash it was better to be thrown clear of the vehicle than to be strapped in. Children roamed freely in back seats. In station wagons, kids rode facing backward in the rear cargo area, waving at the cars behind them. Nobody was buckled, nobody was restrained. Parents held babies on their laps in the front seat. New York became the first state to mandate seatbelt use in 1984. Today, all 50 states have seatbelt laws for front seat occupants. NHTSA estimates seatbelts save approximately 15,000 lives per year. An unrestrained child in a vehicle today can result in criminal charges.
Here's a phrase you didn't hear in 1975. Did you remember to buckle in the baby? Car seats existed. They'd been around since the 1930s. But here's the thing, they weren't designed for safety. The earliest car seats for children were designed to keep the child elevated so they could see out the window, or to keep them contained so they didn't climb all over the car. Safety was an afterthought, if it was a thought at all. In 1975, there were no federal standards for child car seat crash performance. A parent might strap a baby into a flimsy plastic seat that attached to the regular seatbelt, and in a 30-mile-per-hour crash, that seat would disintegrate, launching the child forward like a projectile. Tennessee passed the first child car seat law in 1978. A landmark 1985 NHTSA study found that car crashes were the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 4. By the late 1980s, all 50 states had child restraint laws. Today, failure to properly restrain a child in a vehicle is a criminal offense in every state, Some carried jail time.
Picture a Friday night in 1975. It's 11 p.m. You've been at Frankie's bar for 3 hours. You've had, by your own count, 5, maybe 6 beers. You slide off the bar stool, grab your keys, wave goodnight, and you drive home. And here's the thing. Depending on your weight and what you ate, your blood alcohol content might be sitting at 0.09%, which means in 1975, in most American states, you were driving completely legally. The legal limit in most states through the 1970s was 0.10% BAC. In some states, even higher, and enforcement was minimal. There were no standardized field sobriety tests, breathalyzers were new and not widely used. A cop who pulled you over might just tell you to drive carefully and send you on your way. The turning point was Mothers Against Drunk Driving, founded in 1980 after Candy Lightner's 13-year-old daughter was killed by a repeat drunk driver. MADD transformed public consciousness. By the mid-1980s, most states had lowered the limit to 0.08%. Today, driving at 0.10% BAC is a criminal offense in all 50 states.
Let me describe a toy that was sold in every Kmart, Sears, and Woolworths in America in 1975. Take a heavy metal dart. We're talking real mass here, maybe 8 inches long, weighted at the front end. Now attach a large plastic stabilizer fin to the back and make the tip out of solid steel, sharpened to a point. Now give 4 of these to families with children. Lawn darts, sold under brand names like Jarts and Javelin, were a standard backyard game throughout the 1960s and 1970s. You set up 2 plastic rings about 35 feet apart on the grass, and players took turns lobbing the darts underhand, trying to land them inside the ring. The dart that hit closest to center scored a point. The problem was what happened when the dart didn't land in the ring. Between 1978 and 1987, lawn darts caused an estimated 670 emergency room visits per year. 3 children died after being struck in the head by the darts. In 1988, after a 7-year-old girl in California was killed, the CPSC voted to ban the sale of lawn darts in the United States. Today, selling the original sharp-tipped version can result in federal charges.
Of all the toys we're going to talk about today, Clackers might be the one that most perfectly captures what the 1970s were like. The concept was simple. 2 heavy acrylic balls, each about the size of a golf ball, suspended on a rigid string from a central ring. You held the ring between your fingers and moved your wrist rhythmically up and down. The balls would swing, gather momentum, and then, clack, smash together above and below your hand with a satisfying, eardrum-rattling crack. Children competed to keep the balls clacking the longest. Some got remarkably good at it. Others got remarkably injured. The problems were numerous. The balls would occasionally shatter from the repeated impact, sending razor-sharp acrylic shrapnel at eye level. Even when they didn't shatter, a moment of poor wrist control sent 2 heavy balls swinging directly into the user's face or knuckles at considerable velocity. The CPSC received so many injury reports that many schools banned clackers by 1972. The FDA added them to a list of banned hazardous toys. Today, clackers can still be purchased, but modern versions use softer, safer materials. The original heavy acrylic version is effectively off the market.
Before we go any further, let's acknowledge something. The Easy Bake Oven was magic. Actual, genuine magic. You were 8 years old. You tore open a tiny packet of cake mix, added a few drops of water, stirred it with a miniature spatula, slid the pan into a toy oven, and 20 minutes later, you had made cake. Real cake that you could eat, that you made yourself. The pride was immense. Here's what was actually making that cake: a 100-watt incandescent light bulb. That's it.
A standard household light bulb, the kind you'd screw into a table lamp, was the heating element inside every Easy Bake Oven sold from 1963 through the early 2000s. The light bulb could reach temperatures well above 350 degrees Fahrenheit inside the oven chamber, and the slot that you slid the pan through, wide enough for a small hand to reach in. Children suffered second-degree burns, hands, fingers, wrists, with disturbing regularity. By 2006, the CPSC had received 249 reports of burns. One 5-year-old girl lost part of a finger. In 2007, Hasbro recalled 1 million Easy Bake Ovens after reports of children getting their hands and fingers trapped in the opening. The product was redesigned to use an enclosed heating element. Today, the original light bulb version is discontinued. Not really. But in 1975, lead-based paint was absolutely standard. It was in your kitchen, your bedroom, your child's nursery, the trim around your windows, the banister on your staircase, the walls of your living room. Lead paint was favored because it was durable, it covered well, it held its color. It was, by the standards of the era, excellent paint. The problem is what lead does to the human nervous system, particularly in developing children. Lead is a neurotoxin. Children who ingest lead paint chips or inhale lead dust from deteriorating paint suffer irreversible neurological damage, lower IQ, behavioral problems, developmental delays, learning disabilities. In 1975, if your child was developing oddly, struggling in school, having behavior problems, seeming somehow off, lead poisoning was rarely considered as a cause, because lead paint was just in your walls. It was everywhere. The Consumer Product Safety Commission banned lead paint for residential use in 1978. Today, any contractor who disturbs lead paint in a pre-1978 home without following EPA-certified lead-safe work practices faces fines up to $37,500 per day per violation. Real estate disclosures legally require sellers to inform buyers of known lead paint hazards. Do you remember the smell of gas stations in the 1970s? It had a particular quality to it, sharper, heavier than the smell of modern unleaded gasoline. That distinctive quality came, in part, from tetraethyl lead. Added to gasoline since the 1920s to prevent engine knock, lead made cars run smoother and allowed higher compression ratios for more power. It also poured lead particles into the atmosphere every time a car burned a tank of gas. By 1975, American cars were burning roughly 200,000 tons of lead per year. That lead went into the air, into the soil, into the dust that settled on playgrounds, sidewalks, and vegetable gardens. Studies have since found that children who grew up in areas with heavy vehicle traffic in the leaded gasoline era had measurably higher blood lead levels and lower IQ scores. The EPA began requiring the use of unleaded gasoline in new cars in 1975. Leaded fuel was phased out gradually, with the U.S. banning it for highway use in 1996. The results were dramatic. Average blood lead levels in Americans dropped by 75% between 1976 and 1991. Some researchers have suggested the leaded gasoline phase-out contributed to a nationwide drop in violent crime. In 1975, your candy was a different color. Red dye number 2, officially known as amaranth, was the most widely used red food coloring in the United States for decades. It gave maraschino cherries their vivid crimson. It tinted strawberry ice cream. It colored sodas, candies, pet food, and cosmetics. If something was red in 1975, there was a good chance red dye number 2 made it that way. Then, in 1971, Soviet researchers published a study suggesting that high doses of red dye number 2 caused cancer in test rats. The FDA took years to evaluate the data. The dye remained on the market while the agency deliberated. The public grew increasingly anxious. In a remarkable moment of corporate caution, Mars, the maker of M&Ms, stopped including red candies in 1976, even though M&Ms had never used red dye number 2. They used red dye number 40. But the public panic was so intense that red M&Ms disappeared for 11 years, returning only in 1987 when red dye 40 was declared safe. The FDA banned red dye number 2 in January 1976. Today, it cannot be legally used in American food products.
Before saccharin, before aspartame, before Splenda, before all of it, there were cyclamates. Discovered accidentally in 1937, cyclamates were 30 to 50 times sweeter than sugar, and they were everywhere by the 1960s. Diet Right Cola, Tab, sugar-free Kool-Aid. Thousands of products carried the cyclamate sweetener, marketed to weight-conscious Americans who wanted sweetness without calories. Then, in 1969, a study came out suggesting that high doses of cyclamates caused bladder cancer in laboratory rats. The doses were enormous, equivalent to a human drinking hundreds of cans of diet soda per day. But the science was alarming enough and the political pressure was strong enough that the FDA acted immediately. In October 1969, FDA Commissioner Herbert Lay announced the ban. By 1970, cyclamates had been removed from the American market. The decision was controversial. Many scientists argued the rat study was not applicable to humans. Canada still permits cyclamates today. So do most European countries.
There was a time when fresh milk meant something specific, something real. In many American communities through the 1970s, you could buy milk directly from a local dairy, sometimes still warm, unpasteurized, unhomogenized. The cream settled to the top in a thick layer. The taste was rich and full in a way that supermarket milk wasn't. Families who grew up on raw milk often describe it as incomparably better. Raw milk also carried a risk that pasteurization was specifically designed to eliminate: pathogenic bacteria, Salmonella, E. coli O157H7, Listeria, Campylobacter. These organisms can survive in raw milk and cause serious, sometimes fatal illness, particularly in children, elderly people, and those with compromised immune systems. In 1987, the FDA issued regulations mandating pasteurization for all milk sold in interstate commerce. Most states followed with their own restrictions. Today, raw milk is legal for in-state sale in some form in about 30 states, but the regulations are strict. Interstate raw milk sales remain federally prohibited.
If you grew up anywhere near a set of railroad tracks in the 1970s, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The tracks were a landmark. They were a meeting point. They were the unofficial boundary between one part of town and another. Kids walked on the rails, trying to keep their balance, arms out, one foot in front of the other. They put pennies on the rails before a train came and collected the flattened discs afterward, warm and stretched to impossibility. The older kids, the cool ones, would put their ears to the rail to feel the vibration of an approaching train from miles away. Or they'd wait for a freight train to pass at walking speed and dare each other to touch it. None of this was sanctioned. All of it was common. The railroad companies knew it happened and did relatively little about it because, frankly, everyone did it. The calculus has since changed dramatically. Modern trains are heavier, faster, and far quieter than their predecessors. A freight train moving at speed cannot stop for a mile or more, and trespassing on railroad property is now a federal offense under 49 CFR Part 234, carrying fines up to $10,000 and the possibility of criminal charges.
Imagine going to the airport today and walking straight to the gate. No metal detectors, no baggage scanners, no TSA, no taking off your shoes or separating your laptop or measuring your liquids in 3-ounce bottles. You simply walked into the terminal, went to the gate, and got on the plane.
That was flying in 1975. If you were meeting a relative flying in, you walked down the jetway and waited right at the door of the plane, not at baggage claim, at the actual door of the aircraft. Cockpit doors were often open during boarding. Passengers sometimes chatted with the pilots. The 1970s were actually a decade of extraordinary air piracy. Hijackings were common enough that airports began installing basic magnetometers in 1973. But the security apparatus was minimal by modern standards, and enforcement was inconsistent. Over 200 hijacking attempts occurred in the United States between 1968 and 1972 alone. September 11, 2001 changed everything. The Aviation and Transportation Security Act created the TSA within months of the attacks. Today, the average American air traveler spends 30 to 45 minutes in security screening. Walking straight to the gate is a memory that belongs to a different America.
In 1975, an 18-year-old American could walk into a bar, order a beer, and drink it legally in the majority of states. This was a relatively recent change. Following the 26th Amendment in 1971, which lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, many states reconsidered their drinking age laws. The logic was straightforward. If you were old enough to be drafted, to vote, to sign contracts, to die for your country, you were old enough to buy a beer. By the mid-1970s, 29 states had lowered their drinking age to 18, 19, or 20. College towns were transformed. The bar scenes in places like Madison, Wisconsin, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Gainesville, Florida were extraordinary. Tens of thousands of newly legal drinkers discovering bars for the first time. The consequences were severe. Studies showed a dramatic correlation between the lower drinking age and traffic fatalities among young people. Alcohol was involved in more than 60% of traffic deaths in the 18 to 20 age group. MAD became a powerful political force. In 1984, Congress passed the National Minimum Drinking Age Act, threatening to withhold federal highway funds from states that didn't raise the age to 21. By 1988, all 50 states had complied.
This one is more complicated than the others, and it's important. In 1975, child labor laws in the United States had a significant exception: agriculture. The Fair Labor Standards Act, which regulated child labor in most industries, applied very differently to farm work. Children as young as 12 could work unlimited hours on farms outside of school hours with parental consent. On their family's farm, there was no minimum age at all. This meant that across rural America, from the strawberry fields of California to the tobacco farms of North Carolina to the sugar beet operations of Colorado, children worked alongside their parents in physically demanding, sometimes dangerous conditions. For many families, especially migrant worker families, the children's labor was economically essential. It was understood within communities as normal, even character building. And in many ways, it reflected a continuity with centuries of agricultural life in which the farm was a family operation where everyone contributed. The laws have since tightened significantly with stricter age requirements and safety regulations, but agricultural work remains the industry with the most exemptions for child workers under federal law, a fact that advocates continue to challenge. In 1975, you could walk into certain pet stores in America and buy a baby alligator, a real one, a live one, for a few dollars. Boa constrictors, ocelots, squirrel monkeys, capuchins, kinkajous, coatis. If the store could source it, you could buy it. No permit, no background check, no inspection of your home, no assessment of your ability to care for a 12-foot reptile. The exotic pet trade of the 1960s and 1970s was staggering in its scale and its carelessness. Wild animals were taken from their native habitats in enormous numbers. Many died in transit. Most of the rest died within years from improper care. Diets that didn't match their biology, temperatures that didn't match their native climate, habitats that couldn't accommodate their instincts. And when they got too big, too dangerous, or too inconvenient, they were released. Florida's Everglades today host tens of thousands of Burmese pythons, many descended from released pets. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service began implementing CITES regulations in 1975, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Over the following decades, state by state, permit requirements multiplied. Today, owning many exotic animals without a permit is a federal crime.